Hello, listeners, and welcome back to the Charles Aris podcast. I am thrilled to be hosting a special revenue cycle management edition of the Charles Aris podcast here. I am completely revved up for Rev Cycle today, and I am Jacob Sattler, practice leader here, leader of the healthcare revenue cycle management practice with Charles Aris, and I'm joined by TJ Renne, senior director of Rev Cycle at Flourish Research. Today, we'll be discussing some best practices, talking about his career path, the transferable skills across a clinical research platform like Flourish that also apply to a healthcare provider setting, the complexity of the relationships that you have with payers, mapping out great processes, the technology adaptations that you need to play. And so I am so thrilled here to be joined by TJ. TJ, introduce yourself to the listeners as well.
Cool. Yeah, no, excited for the opportunity. Hopefully we can get some good information out there that will help someone along the way. So my name's TJ Renne. My role is Senior Director of Revenue Cycle at Flourish Research, and I have been with the company since July of 2024.
Fabulous. Thank you, TJ. A little bit of career background for you. Could you walk us through your career path thus far and what led you to Flourish?
Yeah, so I graduated college with my bachelor's in operations management. So obviously I went into insurance that did not have any relevance to my degree. Decided pretty quickly that insurance was not the field that I obviously wanted to go in and continue my career in. But I had that company pay for my master's in finance. So that was a positive. After that, I left and started to work in the CRO space, so clinical research organization space for PRA Health Sciences in their finance department, which was eventually bought by Icon PLC, which is one of the leading CROs in the space. And then was there between PRA and Icon for 7 years and then left and came over to Flourish Research.
Fantastic. And congratulations on hitting the 1 year mark there with Flourish back in July of 24 is when you joined. So that's fabulous. What does a day in the life look like for you today, and how does that compare to a year ago?
Yeah, so a day in the life now is basically a typical day would be seeing where our revenue is tracking for the month and looking into any concerns of what we're seeing coming through with the trends. So if we're seeing revenue light at a specific site, working with that site to determine why, to see if there's some way we could pivot what they're doing to make up the gap we're seeing before the month ends. And then it's working with my team to address any sort of issues that they're facing with clients or with obtaining payment on work that we've already completed. It's working with our budgets and contracts team to get any amendments in place for contracts that have changed since inception that we are doing work out of scope that we need to recover, sort of thing. And then it's a lot of just reporting for our executive leadership team and our PE partner.
And what would you say are some of the most significant challenges that you faced either most recently at Flourish or throughout your career in the space?
Yeah, so I'd say the most significant challenges would be when I first came into Flourish. It was a company that grew really quickly, but the processes hadn't kept up with the growth. So there was a lot of reporting availability issues, KPIs being in place, processes being in place to help the staff follow, to ensure everything's being completed. So when I came in, that was my focus the first couple months, was getting all of that established so that we had a baseline to go off of.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And maybe we should take a beat here too, TJ, and highlight that in the clinical research space with CROs as the sponsors, as Flourish as a site where that testing is taking place, it is slightly different, right, than the
Hmm.
traditional healthcare revenue cycle management placements that we tend to make. But they operate quite similarly. You don't necessarily have an insurance provider per se, but the clinical research organization fills that function as well.
Exactly.
What qualities or skills do you believe that you've picked up and are essential to your role that are similar across the entire scope of revenue cycle management?
Like you said, I was in the industry, but not to this level at the sites. So it was coming in and it was evaluating the skill set of the current staff, making my own assessment of potential qualities that we might want in the staff going forward. And then a lot of it's being adaptable because you may come in and think that you know how the company should be structured, how the process should be, know kind of, you may assume that there's too many staff, that it's just because of inefficiencies with the staff. But until you dig in, you can't really make that assessment because even if the place you worked at prior is using the same software, they may not be using it in the same way. They may not be using the reporting capabilities just because they don't know how to, sort of thing. So it's coming in and evaluating the processes from start to end and seeing what seeing why those processes are currently in place, and then evaluating if you were to make a process change, how would that impact everyone downstream? Because obviously you don't want to make any decisions without considering the downstream impact, because I've seen that firsthand at prior companies I've worked for where that's not understood on the front end and then it's more chaos than it needs to be.
Absolutely. In working in this space, I found that there do seem to be some universal friction points, regardless of if it's clinical research or a payer provider space. There's front end intake, there's change orders, there's relationships that you have to foster in negotiations with the payer, regardless of the business model. Where do you see the biggest area of opportunity where you can turn a friction point into a advantage?
In any industry, this is always changing. So just because clients were paying for something in 2024 doesn't mean that they are in 2025. So how are you going to adapt? Or change orders, are you requesting them actively or are they an afterthought when you are closing the project out? And that's when you try to get a change order approved, because that's going to impact your ability to recover out of scope work with any client you have. It's always better to address it as it's occurring so that if it's something that you tell the client, hey, we're having to do this extra task, it's going to cost X number going forward. Do you want to pay for this? That if they say no, then your staff can stop doing it. So that's key. What I found is that a lot of times amendment requests or change orders are kind of an afterthought for companies, and they are just like, hey, we'll look at this when the project's over, and then we'll go back to the client. But at the end of the project, the client's not going to want to add costs to a project that's already completed. So if you're not addressing it while the project's ongoing, your chances of recovery just get less and less. And then what you'll also see is that the payers are switching their process constantly. So it's identifying and addressing the change proactively and not reactively so that you're not dealing with a huge issue months later where all of a sudden you have a huge amount of aging due to something that you could have addressed right when it was happening and you never would have ran into the issue.
I love that word that you just used there, TJ, which is the proactive nature of revenue cycle management, and effective leaders in the space get out in front of those issues and put the processes in place to do it well before it becomes an issue and becomes that bad word, bad debt, right?
Exactly.
So I love that. Great. Thank you for sharing. In clinical research, you're often dealing with sponsors and CROs, as we mentioned there, instead of traditional insurance payers. What does your approach to contract fulfillment and collections actually look like?
So this should be applicable across multiple industries, but what needs to be happening is that your teams are actively monitoring the contracts and recognizing gaps and addressing them with the client in real time. So kind of what I spoke on before, that the longer you wait to bring them up, the longer you wait to address them, it's going to lower your cost, or it's going to lower your ability to recover the costs that you've already incurred and get paid for that. And then same with the payers, like you need to establish a relationship with them so that they're actively communicating changes on their end so that you guys again can get in front of it and get processes in place that when they make the change to however they're paying, you guys are ready to adapt at that moment and continue your billing as normal, continue your collections as normal, and you're not going to see an interruption with that, because that could be, I've seen it before where it's not proactively addressed, and then your funds coming in just come to a halt. And then it's a panic and a scramble because obviously everyone above you and your P firm is highly concerned that there's issues with your collections.
Am I hearing you say too, it's much more of an ongoing matter and relationship in terms of that relationship with and negotiation with the payer?
Exactly. Yeah, it's establishing those relationships up front so that as things change during the course of the project, that you're addressing them, you have someone that is working with you to solve the problem instead of being against you. They're working they're working to help you get paid. They're helping you if something isn't being submitted correctly or the way they need it or provided with the documentation that they need. They're providing that in real time so that we can address it and get it resolved going forward, so that again at the end of the study you don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars that hasn't been paid, and you have to go back and figure all of that out and make adjustments and potentially write off revenue that you shouldn't have earned at the time that you earned it.
Interesting. Is there a lesson or two that sticks out in your mind about that negotiation, that reporting, that relationship management that does still apply to the traditional insurance world?
As far as the payer or the insurance payer world, it would relate with one, contract management, because you're all going to have, in any industry, you're going to have a contract with the client that shows what they will pay you for, what price they'll pay for it. And then it's up to you as the provider of the service to be monitoring your budgets, to be monitoring your collections actively so that you are addressing issues as they come up instead of, again, at the end. What I see a lot is that companies will wait to they'll reconcile the finances of the project until the very end. And then they discover issues with potential misinterpretations of the contract between the provider and the client. And then if you're trying to address that at the end of the study, then one, you don't have any power at that point because the work's already done. So what's the incentive of the client to work with you to give you more money for work that you did? It's zero. So your ability to recover things at the end is almost impossible. So if you switch the mindset to, hey, I'm dealing with this insurance payer and the contract needs to be revised because initially we assumed that this specific task was going to take 2 hours, but now we're seeing that it's taking 4 hours because of X, Y, and Z. Are you bringing that up when you're first seeing that so that you can bring that up with the client and get the entire contract revised? Or is it you're waiting until the end? And then, one, if you're waiting until the end, how long was the project? Do you even have the ability to go back and look and notice, or do you have the ability to document what was actually taking you that long to do it, or was the project so long that the staff that was initially doing it isn't even with you anymore, or they're on a different project and they have no idea. So addressing everything in real time makes it a lot easier at the reconciliation time of the contract because you're not dealing with those issues along with trying to right size the collections on the project. And then two, if you are billing something wrong that the insurance payer communicated back at the beginning that they're not going to pay for, but you've been earning that revenue during the whole life cycle of the study, how is that going to impact you at the end of the study when you have to write off all of that money and then take that hit in that 1 month instead of if you would have addressed it at the beginning, you weren't even earning it.
I think that's really astute, TJ, and you can swap out a couple of different pieces of verbiage there that apply, whether it's eligibility and verification in healthcare or the tasks that are being accomplished in clinical research, the visits, doctors' visits versus tasks. I think that was really astute. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and I'll just add one point to it. So like in the clinical research space, like an issue that we see is a lot of our stuff has to be entered into what they call an EDC. So it's like an electronic database that captures kind of the information that the clinical staff is doing for the patient. So they put it into the EDC, and then basically that's what the sponsor is going to use when the study's over to submit to the FDA to get approval. So a lot of our contracts stipulate that if the information is not recorded in the EDC, then we won't get paid for it. So in the historically how it was being handled was the same way of let's just address it all at the end. But with those contracts, if it's not in the EDC when we're addressing it at the end, the EDC is already locked. So we can't put in anything into the EDC. So what we were running into was, again, we're not going to get paid for it. So then we're writing off work that we did complete, but we didn't follow the contract stipulation correctly. So they're not going to pay us for it. But if we would have proactively been looking at that while the study was going on, we would have known that there were those gaps in the system and we would have addressed it and got paid for it.
That's great. At the end of the day, revenue cycle management is three things: people, process, and systems. That's spot on, as we just referenced earlier. Can you pull on that process element to it, right? Process mapping across different settings is absolutely crucial. I'm curious, when you first walked into your current role, how did you map out that revenue flow in a way that could be more recognizable, right, to you as a leader, but also your peers, those who you report to, et cetera?
So when I came in, I started from the ground up. So coming from the CRO industry into the site side, like, yes, there's a lot of transferable knowledge, but I didn't know exactly how everything was being done at the site level. So it would have been easy for me to come in and make the assumption of, oh, this process isn't the thing that we should be doing. Let's change it. Or this staffing model isn't right based on what I've seen previously. But what I did was I came in and I shadowed the process from the start to the end. So it was shadowing the coordinators in what they do day to day, what their process is, and then following that process, how does that translate to revenue? When does the revenue hit? What are the gaps? What are the current processes they're doing? Why are they doing them? So I could understand, one, why the process was as it was, and then I could also follow it downstream so I could understand the impacts that if I were to change the process, that I knew up front what other issues would this cause? Or is this strictly that if I make this, it's going to make our team more efficient and it's not going to impact anyone downstream?
That makes sense. What surprised you the most when you started that shadowing, when you started looking at it more deeply? What surprised you about where the revenue leakage was actually taking place in clinical research?
So when I first came in, I had the assumption that the processes were just not efficient. And that's why everything took so long. But after shadowing, I saw that the inefficiency actually wasn't with the staff, it was with the software that we use to do our finances. So then it's looking at what changes can we make? What capability does the software have that we're not using so that we can get more efficient that way? And for revenue leakage, so regardless of the industry, you're going to have numerous expenses that come in, but is your AP department and your AR department aligned? What processes you have in place with AP where they're verifying that the invoice is actually covered by the contract before they pay it? And then how is that being communicated with the AR staff to invoice it? We all have so many different vendors doing work that you really need a process to see what is being incurred and then verifying that is being billed back to the client on the project level. When we have patient expenses that are coming in, are we actively addressing those? Because those are obviously the most important, where if they have a stipend that we need to pay them, or they had expenses related to the visit, so travel or meals or anything like that, we want to get those addressed and paid. And then are we then billing those back to the client? Because that's ultimately what matters. Are we getting paid for what we're paying out? So that can be a huge cause of your leakage that you see. Are there invoiceables or parts of your contract that you should be billing as the project is going along, or is your current process you are just invoicing those all at the end? Because if you're doing it as it's happening, you're able to get the support from your staff that you need to be able to provide the justification for it to be paid. If you're waiting until the end, are you able to get that justification? Are you able to get that documentation? Are you still going to have it? And then it's setting up your reporting, which is what I kind of had to work on a lot when I first came in, was giving me the visibility into where our leakage was so that I could look into that and easily identify where it was at. What sites are we seeing it at? And then it makes it a lot easier to dig in specifically, okay, if this site isn't invoicing for these specific things, let's connect with them and see why. It gives you like a more pointed, attack plan instead of just this certain thing that we bill for is light. Okay, well, we have 30 different sites, so how is that going to help me identify the problem? Does it make sense for me to tell all of my staff to go look, or does it make sense for me to find specifically where the issues are so that the staff can go in and know what site they need to look at?
Can you pull on that thread a little bit more on reporting specifically? What reporting do you think is most important for your executive leaders and even investors to actually understand what the health of your revenue cycle looks like?
So you need to have your reporting built so that your financials are predictable. So that's the biggest thing. So when you're dealing with, whether it's PE or you're a public company and you're just dealing with C-suite employees, you need to be predictable because obviously your company is going to use that as their forecast with whoever they're reporting to. So if you are giving numbers that don't come to actuality, can you be trusted? So it's starting with, how are you forecasting what your current month's revenue is going to be, and how accurate are you? And if you're not accurate, do you need to go back and look at the entire process in its entirety and make sure that the assumptions that are being used are correct, that the way that you're forecasting revenue is that correct? Because a lot of times there could be a different mindset that was put into place before you got there. And you need to kind of see, were those assumptions correct, or have they changed since then where you need to modify them? So that was a lot of what I did when I first came in was looking at, okay, so how are we forecasting the current month's revenue? Looking at that process. Okay, I don't necessarily think that this is the best way to do it. Let's do it this other way. So then you fix that. So now in our company, we have our current month revenue projections locked down. Always hitting, we're hitting around 105% average every month. So then let's look at how we're forecasting future months. Are the assumptions with that correct? Because they may not be. When I came in, the revenue curve that was being applied, I changed the assumptions with how it was being applied. I changed the assumptions of when we start forecasting the revenue, when we end forecasting the revenue. And then what that's going to do is it's going to make all your forecasts, all your numbers more reliable. And then once you establish those, then it's easy to go back and see, okay, when I'm looking at it this month, what changed since last month in the forecast? Does it make sense? Or is there potentially an issue with the data that you need to dig into? Because if you're not able to do that, then how are you really going to report on any sort of numbers to your stakeholders?
Interesting. And how do you think about the underlying metrics that you're reporting? Revenue cycle management is one of the more cross-functional roles, right? You're partnering with operations, you're partnering with finance. How do you think about creating metrics that foster that trust that finance and operations can trust?
Yeah, so it's just being active partners with the other functional groups. So it's coming in, it's looking at how the current processes are, it's providing your feedback to the other groups in a way that they understand of why it potentially needs to change and what the benefit's going to be. And then it's actively communicating any changes with that they're going to see on their end and just getting buy-in from everyone so that it's understood that this process may be completely different than what we were doing before, but here's the why and here's what it's going to help us do. And then listening to any concerns that the other groups have, and then determining, is that actually a concern that we're going to see, or is it just the concern because they haven't done it this way before?
Right. I'm hearing you say two things there, TJ. You're speaking their language and you're explaining the why. And these are the metrics we're using to get to the accuracy. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, exactly. And it's aligning on, if you're going to make assumptions for your forecast, it's aligning with the other operational groups to ensure that they feel the assumptions are correct as well. Give them a voice, make them feel heard, take it into consideration so that, because you don't want to provide it, you don't want to make your own assumptions that don't align operationally with what they're expecting, because then you're just going to have constant friction between what you're providing and what they think the number should be.
And how about on the technology side, TJ? What technology challenges are you currently dealing with in the research setting?
So and I think this information is transferable regardless of what industry you're in, but a lot of times when you are coming into a PE firm, the reporting isn't already going to be built for you. It is what it is. It could be that what I saw when I first came in is that the information was available, but it wasn't available in one specific report for what you wanted. So it was a lot of tying reports together to get the information that wasn't being done historically. So it's like you may have the ability with your current technology to do it, but do you know how to use it in a way that you could? You're always going to run into issues with access to information from third-party systems. So is there a way to work with your vendor to get APIs built on their side so that you can access the information in your data warehouse? Obviously, that's going to make it the most efficient way for you to do it. So my problem when I came in was that for the software that we use, it's not great with pulling large amounts of data. So if I want to pull a historical data pull of all of our finances, I can't do it in one pull. Like the limitations of the software are too great where if I want to pull the historical finances, I'd have to pull it in like 6 week increments for the last 7 years, which obviously I don't want to do because that would be highly time extensive and a
Ain't
waste of
nobody got
time.
time for that, TJ.
Exactly. So worked with our vendor. We got them to build the APIs that we need. And now we have their data flowing into our data warehouse so that we can build reporting off of that. And we're not so reliant on the system limitations for the information. And what I also came into was basically the evaluation of potential vendors, like technology vendors that could help us build some of what we needed to build. So the question that you would want to ask, regardless of the industry you're in, is are they planning to build you reporting based on APIs from a data warehouse? Or is their plan just to build you a band-aid of reporting where you're having to manually pull files, you're having to manually update it all the time because is that really what you want to pay someone to help you build? Probably not. Have they built it in the industry that you're in? Not, then they may not know all of the limitations with the way maybe your data is set up or the capabilities of the remittances you're getting from your vendors for the payments. It may not be in a format that they can actually do something with. So you want to always be upfront with what you need and then talk to multiple vendors to make sure that what you're being told can be done is actually feasible. Because I've had vendors before that told me, yeah, we can automate all of your cash application. And I was like, awesome. Like that's going to save each of my person 2 hours a day. So let's do it. But then when I talk to the other vendors, they're like, show me the remittances that are coming in. Are they all the same? Are they in the same format? It's like obviously not because you're dealing with a million different vendors. So then I found out that it could not be done. It's good to get a sense check between multiple vendors of what you're being told by one to see if it's actually feasible because it may not be. Obviously, you don't want to go down a path with a vendor that's telling you that each of your staff can save 2 hours a day because they're going to automate all of it. And then you sign the contract with them and then they tell you after, oh, wait, it can't be done unless you get all your vendors to change everything and put it in a specific format. And are you ever going to be able to get the vendors to do that? Probably not.
That's great. And I'm thinking too, TJ, not just vendors, but there's a shift in this landscape to offshore resources as well. How do you evaluate offshore resources? Have you found them in your world to be helpful in what you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, so I've seen offshoring. I saw it firsthand at my last company where there was a big push. Obviously, I mean, all companies have the push. We need to reduce cost, but keep the production at the same level. So you need to be strategic in how you're offshoring. Is the location that you're offshoring to, do they have the ability to do what your current staff is? Because that's a big misinterpretation I see in the industry is this staff, we can just outsource them all to X country. They'll be able to do the same thing. But what I saw at my prior company was the country that they outsourced through, that staff needs everything to be black and white. So everything needs to be in a certain process. They don't do well deviating from the process. So is your industry set up that the process is the same across the board that they can follow? Or is the process gray where you're going to run into different stuff all the time and it's impossible to put down a process for everything that they would have to do? Two, it's putting in a comprehensive transition plan because I've seen it where the transition did not go well and it was just shifted over. And what we ran into is that the team that took over didn't know how to bill it according to how the vendors needed it. So with vendors, whether it's insurance, construction, whatever, you're going to have specific ways you have to invoice them. A lot of them have specific portals that things have to go through to get paid. They have to reference certain information. A lot of them want you to reference the PO number that the project's associated with so that they can associate it with the correct one to get payment insured. Does your offshore staff that you're transitioning to know that for every specific client? Because what I saw was they did not follow how we were historically billing them through the portals. They were billing them all through just email addresses that the clients weren't checking or they weren't addressing because, again, it wasn't following what was stated in the contract that it had to be put through the portal. So we ran into basically the issue where payments just stopped happening. DSO skyrocketed, aging skyrocketed, and then you're in panic mode of, okay, what is the problem? And then you find out, because you're not going to find out right away that the issue is there, because work you're billing right now is going to have payment terms, and your clients aren't going to pay you typically ahead of payment terms. So you're not going to notice it until 2 to 3 months later that the payments have stopped. Then you're going in and you're billing it the correct way through whatever the process is supposed to be. But in the client's mind, this is the first time they're getting it. So the payment terms are restarting again. So instead of it was supposed to be paid 60 days from the invoice, it's now going to be 60 days from when you correctly submitted it to the client. And what's that doing to your DSO? Your DSO went from 2 months to potentially 4 months if you caught it right when it wasn't paid. But how many of us are catching that right when it happens? And it's probably not many. And then it's how long is it now going to be where you were expecting payment within 2 months, but you're not going to see it until month 6 or month 7.
That momentary blip then turns into a doubling of the DSO.
Yep. And then it's, can your company even withstand that impact? Or are you living basically month to month where you're reliant on that cash coming in to pay your bills? If you're a large company, you're probably not. If you're a smaller company, you might be, where you can't have 3 months in a row of minimal collections and you're able to keep functioning as a company. I've heard of other companies that did the same thing where they outsourced, it was a disaster, and then they went bankrupt because they couldn't recover fast enough to get the money in. You have so much expense going out. Do you have the cash coming in that's going to offset it? And if you don't, how long can your company sustain that? Because again, if you messed up on the billing, you may have some clients that will make it right with you. You'll have other clients that hey, it's your guys' problem. That's not our issue. You didn't submit it correctly. We have our process. We're following it.
Right.
So when I went into looking to outsource at Flourish, I knew what strategy I didn't want to follow. Mine is more, I'm not looking for the lowest cost. I'm looking for a lower cost, but I want the employees to be able to think outside of the box so that they are addressing issues and it's not just them being processors, if that makes sense.
It really does. And throughout this conversation, I'm hearing a couple of things that stand out to me in terms of the skill set that a truly great revenue cycle leader up and down the stack, from an analyst all the way up to director, vice president, would need. The proactive nature, the building trust. You just talked about thinking outside the box. What other skill sets do you see as essential in revenue cycle in your organization?
So my process may seem a little bit out of the box to other people, but my thought is that the role needs to be more analytical based. So when I came in, I didn't strictly go after, the normal skill set of a RCM team. So just a accounts receivable associate that is more process oriented and not thinking oriented. So I kind of shifted my hiring strategy where I had people that, were the typical accounts receivable skill set, but then I brought in people with the analytical side skill set and then had them learn from each other. So the typical accounts receivable associate was teaching the analytical person how to do the day-to-day stuff, and then the analytical person was kind of reteaching the AR side of, you see a problem, now let's identify what the problem is, how do we fix it now and not wait for it to snowball later. Let's not just be processors only, where if our staff is doing work that is out of scope, that instead of just seeing it in there and saying, oh, this isn't in the contract and move on, we're raising the red flag at that time. Hey, we probably need an amendment for this. So it's giving you, you're now not just relying on the operations staff to potentially address out of scope. Your accounts receivable team is also doing it too. So you have two sides of the company looking at this in tandem, recognizing that this work is happening when it's happening, and then we're proactively going back to the client and addressing it.
Could you go a click deeper into that? I'm thinking too what you just mentioned about a story that you ran into where a company went bankrupt because of potentially not having that redundancy or that fail safe. You have to get it right the first time sometimes. How do you go about training, whether it's front end staff or anyone else? How do you train them to quote unquote get it done right the first time?
Yeah, so I think when you're first coming in, it's evaluating the entire workflow. What is the front end doing? How does it translate to everyone else downstream? And then collaborating with everyone involved to establish a better process moving forward for everyone. So an example would be at my company, I oversee our budgets and contracts department, our CTMS team, who basically is building the projects in our financial system for the operations team and the finance team to use and to recognize revenue. And then I oversee the revenue cycle management team. So it was looking to see, how are we contracting stuff initially? What problems is that causing everyone downstream? So are our contracts being built in a way that is confusing to people downstream? Is it in a way that the language is really gray, where we're interpreting it one way and the clients are interpreting it a different way, which is obviously a huge risk because the clients are typically going to interpret it in the lowest cost way, as opposed to typically how we're going to do it. So it's getting them aligned at the start, where we're proactively providing them feedback that we're seeing downstream of issues so that they can get that corrected at the start of the study, the start of the contract being initiated, so that we're not running into those later on.
That makes a ton of sense. Why don't we round out here, TJ, with a couple of questions on the investor side as well? You're in a private equity backed environment today. What do you see as important from the sponsor's point of view? What do private equity investors want to see from you as a rev cycle leader, say within the first 6 months of a role, within the first year of a role?
Yeah, so if you're joining as an RCM leader, it's typically because the person they had before wasn't doing it in the way you needed it to be done, or you're implementing it for the first time. So private equity is going to want you to come in. They're going to want you to evaluate the current issues and then obviously develop a plan to fix it. They're going to want to see the improvement at latest by the 6 month. And then by 12 months, you really should have your bigger issues resolved, and you're more focusing on the smaller issues, the less material issues that you can take more time to address. I mean, what you're going to see when you come in is that there's probably a lot of things that you're going to want to change. But is your best strategy to address it all at once, or is it to address big issues one at a time? Maybe 1 month you're addressing your biggest issue, the next month you're addressing the second biggest issue, and you're resolving it that way. For me, that's the better strategy, because it's hard for your staff to pick up new processes and implement them if you're adjusting multiple processes at the same time. Give them a month to learn the new process for your biggest issue, and then next month they're learning the new process for the second biggest issue. You're kind of staggering it. You're not overwhelming them, and you're not driving yourself out because they're like, there's no way I can keep up with this. He's just giving me new processes every day to follow. I don't remember what I'm supposed to be doing anymore. And then it's documenting those processes so that they can go back and reference them. It's continuously reviewing and seeing kind of what knowledge gaps you're seeing amongst the staff, because typically if one person isn't understanding something, there's multiple people that don't understand it. So it's continuous retraining in your team meetings. Are you doing that? Or are your team meetings not really going through training opportunities that you're seeing over the course of the month? So it's just actively seeing those potential gaps in knowledge, those potential gaps in processes, and continuously reinforcing them with the staff as you go, because we all have so many different things that are happening, whatever industry you're in, where you may train on something, one specific procedure that's being done at the site that they may not see that for 6 months. Are they going to remember what you told them 6 months ago? No, like no one's going to remember. They're going to remember, oh yeah, we talked about that, but I have no idea what we talked about. But if you're talking about it consistently, they're starting to put that into their brain and they're going to remember.
Absolutely. Is that how you go about balancing the quick wins that you have and feel a pressure for versus the long term? How do you balance short term versus long term success in that environment?
Yeah, so I would say it's putting these processes in place and then running the data before you put it in place, and then looking at it as you're going so that you can give positive feedback to the staff. So a lot of mine initially was, we had some issues with cash application. So obviously if you have issues with cash application, how are you collecting on what's outstanding if you don't even know what's outstanding? So it's, you know, it was, okay, now we have this much in sitting out there that needs applied. Hey, look, we've reduced that by 3 million since last month. Great job. Let's keep this up. Let's keep that going. And then once you move to collection, so once your cash application's corrected, then you can start doing collection. So here's what our aging balance is. Here's what our DSO is. Here's what it is a month after we implemented the new process. Here's what it is. It's 2 months after. Look at this. Look at all the progress we're making. Look at how much our aging has went down. Let's see how much our DSO has went down. Just providing that constant reinforcement and celebrating the small wins, because you're not going to get to the big wins if you don't get through the small wins.
Absolutely.
And then it's just aligning your vision with the C-suites at your company. It's aligning it with them so that we have alignment with PE. Like, hey, this isn't going to be fixed month one. There's these specific issues. We're going to get them addressed by this month, but it's going to be a gradual thing. We're not going to see DSO and aging fixed in month two, because these are all the issues we have to get through first. So actively communicating what the issues are, what your plan is to fix it, so that everyone's aligned. You're not getting questions of, why is our DSO still so high? Why is our aging so high? Why isn't money coming in yet? Sort of thing, because you've already communicated that. Well, hey, we're not going to be able to start addressing this really until we have the cash application issues fixed, because we don't know on these projects what we haven't been paid because the cash wasn't applied correctly, or it's just sitting at the study and it's not applied to the specific task that was completed.
Excellent. TJ, I can't thank you enough for taking the time out here to speak about your career and your learnings in the rev cycle space. This has been a special rev cycle focused edition of the Charles Aris podcast. I'm Jacob Sattler, the healthcare revenue cycle management practice leader here at Charles Aris. TJ Renne, senior director of rev cycle with Flourish Research. Thank you so much, TJ.
Yeah, thanks for having me.